Hey you. So, What If recently released its final season on Disney Plus, and people fucking hate it. Which, on some level, I guess I can understand. There are a lot of episodes of the show that aren't really my favorite. Some are better than others. That's just the nature of a show like this. But some of the responses I've been seeing to not just the latest season, but the show overall, really has me scratching my head.
I actually can't fucking take it anymore. This is the worst fucking show ever made.
Entirety of What If Season 3, there are maybe 3 or 4 episodes that actually matter. The rest of them, not even worth watching.
In a show that claimed to have infinite possibilities, we got the most boring and uninteresting stories ever told.
Marvel's What If is one of their biggest fumbles in the past couple years. They could have literally done anything. Unlimited potential, unlimited possibilities. But instead of getting, what if Thanos snapped the other half? We got, what if Howard the Duck and Darcy had a magical child and got chased by everyone in the multiverse?
They seem to lack a lot of nuance for the stories the show is telling, favoring instead to just write them off because of the characters involved in a given episode. Ironically, I'm aware how that sounds like I'm not being very nuanced to people's critiques, but between you, me, and the screen, that's because to me everyone seems to have the same exact critique. What If really fell off, man. The fumble of What If needs to be studied. We could have gotten blank, but instead we got Howard the Duck and Darcy. These are but 3 of the many opinions people have shared about this latest season of What If. Not the only ones, but definitely the main critiques thrown at the show. And I want to use this video to talk a little bit about the show and vent about those critiques because I don't really think they're totally fair strikes that people have against the show. I also want to discuss one of the characters at the center of the problems people have with the show, as they are a perfect distillation of how unfair I think many people are being about it. What If is a TV series based on the Marvel Comics series of the same name. The basic gist of the comics were alternative looks at certain moments or characters known to the main Marvel universe, and exploring what they would have been like if circumstances were different. The very first story published was What If Spider-Man Joined the Fantastic Four, written by Roy Thomas with art by Jim Craig and released in November of 1976. The story followed a character known as the Watcher, who was introduced in a Fantastic Four story years earlier, a being of untold power whose objective is to observe but never interfere in the events across time, space, and other realities. One such reality, Spider-Man, during his first issue, joins the Fantastic Four, instead of being rejected by them because he only wanted to be a part of them if it paid. The story laid the groundwork for the entire rest of the series going forward, with stories like What If the Hulk had the brain of Bruce Banner, or What If the Avengers armored up, and What If the Avengers had been formed in the 1950s. In later years, the issues began to include some level of serialization. The 5-part arc Timequake saw the Watcher collect a team of beings from throughout the multiverse to help stop Immortus, known to many now by his more well-known name Kang the Conqueror, and beings known as the Time Twisters from destroying worlds in the multiverse. Another is the 2-part What If the Avengers Lost Operation Galactic Storm, an alternative to the classic Avengers story of the same name, where the Avengers were a part of a massive war between 2 alien races, the Kree and the Shi'ar. Throughout its run, What If continued to tell interesting and unique one-off stories, as well as bigger What If stories centered around major comic events like Civil War and Secret Invasion. The television series very much follows in tradition of the comic. Premiering in August of 2021, the 9-episode first season introduced us to the MCU version of The Watcher, as he guided us through various alternative events of different films in the MCU. The series, created by A.C. Bradley, was the perfect vehicle to further explore the burgeoning MCU multiverse, at that time only explored and introduced in shows like Loki and films like Avengers Endgame. While the first season stuck relatively close to the films of the MCU, with episodes like What If Captain Carter were the first Avenger, or What If Zombies, that were alternatives to Captain America the First Avenger and Avengers Infinity War respectively, subsequent seasons would take more liberties with its stories. Many of the episodes in seasons 2 and 3 aren't based on specific films, but instead just varied tales with some of the characters introduced in Phase 4. Episodes like What If Hela Found the 10 Rings, etc. Like the comics, there were some overlapping serialized stories as well. The first season ended with 2 episodes about the Watcher finally interfering and forming the Guardians of the Multiverse. Characters from various worlds and episodes of that season gathered together to stop Infinity Ultron, an Ultron who inhabits Vision's body and whose consciousness was elevated by the power of all 6 Infinity Stones, from completing the mission he was created for, to bring peace in his time by destroying the multiverse. There were similar episodes in seasons 2 and 3, 2-part stories that would eventually tie together and also featured recurring characters. Which brings us to the critiques. The newest and final final season, for now, maybe, who knows, of the show is out, and the culture isn't really feeling it. I mentioned some of the criticisms earlier, a bunch of episodes people don't care about with characters they don't care about either, and stories that weren't as interesting as they wanted them to be. Other issues centered around the serialization, how many episodes tied to a larger story. From my eyes, though, it kind of seems that a lot of people hate the show for doing exactly what the comics did. As I talked about earlier, much of the what-if stories actually tied into each other and were parts 1 of 5 or 1 of 2. The series, just like the comics, also told their stories based on major events, in the case of the series, the movies, but focused much of its episodes on stories about other characters in the MCU outside of the ones known to fans, which I think worked in its favor. It offered a chance for greater risks to be taken with some of the more established stories and characters, as well as an open playground to tell new ones, which was the goal of the series from the beginning. Brian Andrews, one of the producers of the series, said in an interview with the website Social Thrills, "It's like you never know what you're going to get. You know, you might get an episode that's a comedy. You might get an episode that's kind of dramatic and serious, like super emotional and full of action. Brad, myself, Kevin, Victoria, it's like we all love cinema. We all love movies. We love everything in it. All the genres, and this gave us an opportunity to apply a little taste of variety to genres in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. What if the comic series was always a mixed bag when it came to its stories? You never really got what you wanted 100% of the time, but that was the point. Not every single story in the comics had to be about a specific big comic event or major character, and neither did the TV show. The main point was that you watch or read as if you were the watcher himself, a viewer getting a glimpse into these stories and going along for the ride. Yeah, some of the stories may be weird.
Release the phone.
For every Doctor Strange episode about changing time and the inevitability of death, there's a Howard the Duck episode about having a kid.
Mr. and Mrs. the Duck, but S.H.I.E.L.D. can't entrust a being this powerful to a first-time mom and a gambling addict.
Hey! Recovering gambling addict, thank you. I got the chip. That's the wrong chip.
But that doesn't inherently make these stories bad or not worth telling. Characters were another big complaint from people. Too many episodes of the show featured characters people didn't care about, which I guess is understandable to an extent. Yeah, I'd love to have seen Nova or Ghost Rider or Daredevil in an episode or two, but there was a reason why we didn't. According to another producer of the show, Brad Winderbaum, it was a mandate, an unfortunate one to be sure, from high up that the characters who weren't on screen in the MCU before couldn't just show up on What If. Telling Screen Rant, it was an open world of creativity and freedom that we could play with, but there were rules. The biggest one being that we wanted to make stories that were based on films people had seen. We didn't want to make an episode for a character that hadn't appeared on screen, even if it was a character we know. In the final episode, spoilers by the way, after the other Watchers are defeated and Peggy Carter sacrificed her life to the cheers of pretty much everyone who hates her character, we get a few glimpses of what ifs yet to be. Some include a Hulk as Sorcerer Supreme, Kingo the Eternal with Iron Man armor, a samurai Ghost Rider, an 8-armed Spider-Man, and others. Many took to social media in the aftermath of the season to bemoan this scene, more or less saying that the characters we could have gotten were more interesting than the ones we did get, which I don't really understand. I mean, there's no real way to know for sure if those potential stories would have been better or worse than what we got. Sure, they look interesting, but outside of aesthetics, I don't really think seeing Ghost Rider or Hulk means inherently their stories would be better. The reaction also speaks to what I consider to be a misunderstanding of what their appearance means. These characters aren't what could have been, they're more like what is yet to be. That's what the Watcher fights for every time he intervenes. So let's talk about the Watcher. The main through line through these last 2 episodes of season 3 and even the entire show itself is the Watcher. He's not just our guide, he's also a character that we're watching a part of this story. Through the 3 seasons, we see his transformation from being an observer of stories to an active participant in them. He's broken his oath of non-interference on multiple occasions, and the reason for it stems from his love of the stories he's seen throughout the multiverse.
Tell me, did you make popcorn while Ultron murdered my friends and burned my world to the ground?
You are more than that to me.
Are we?
You, your stories, they are everything to me.
Stories both big and small about people important and not, they all mean something to him. There's as infinite a potential in all of them as there are worlds in the multiverse. The other Watchers we see in the finale imprison him for breaking his oath and reject his ideals because they believe the lives of those they watch over in the multiverse are of little importance.
You really think it worth it, Watcher? Jeopardizing the fifth dimension for these insignificant beings whose lives in the grand scheme of the multiverse matter not.
The ending of the series reaffirms the Watcher's belief that this is false and works both in the text and without to assert that within the multiverse there are a myriad of stories to be told, worlds to be seen, and that all of them matter. They all exist to be seen and, if need be, engaged with to protect. And in saving these worlds, participating in their stories, are a risk to be sure, but one worth taking if it means that more worlds can be born and the multiverse can continue to branch and grow.
It's a miracle that continues to birth new branches of reality for us to watch over. Surely you can see, for a garden to thrive, it must be cultivated, so its trees grow higher, its flowers bloom brighter, and pests that threaten to destroy it all are weeded out.
Because it's a tree now. Thank you, Loki. The Watcher is a personification of that fan who's just so into a story they're watching or reading that they want more than anything to be a part of it but can't because they can only watch or read, observe. But the Watcher isn't like us. He can jump in. He can join the stories he loves. The entire series is about him coming to grips with and ultimately reminding his other Watchers of that idea. That to embrace these worlds, these stories, these people, and to be a part of them is a far greater honor than simply watching them.
So many eons looking down on everything. It becomes hard to imagine something you've never seen before.
And how did you learn?
The people I watched over showed me. You can find lessons in every corner of the multiverse if you open your eyes.
Message!
This is also why I hate hearing that the show is all about Peggy Carter. Peggy Carter, they keep showing her, they keep glazing Peggy Carter. Oh my god, the show centers her too much and not other characters that deserve it more. First off, that's totally subjective. Second of all, that was always the plan. Brad again states, we realized, I think early on in development, as we were starting to get writer A.C. Bradley scripts and starting to look at the arc for the series, that there was going to be a character that bubbled up and became more important. Not more important than the rest, but had a strong relationship with the Watcher, who's really our driving force behind the series, and that's Captain Carter. Yes, this variant of Peggy Carter has been seen more times in other versions of Captain America, including Sam Wilson. It would have, of course, been amazing to see more of Sam Wilson being Captain America and doing Captain America stuff.
Boy, you just earned this ass whooping!
Especially since his movie might not do so hot because of all the reshoots and, other things. But we couldn't get that because, if you remember what I said earlier, at the time of the first season, we hadn't gotten Sam as Cap yet, and per the higher-ups, we couldn't see him until Falcon and the Winter Soldier had finished. Plus, it makes a kind of sense that this character, Peggy, would catch the Watcher's eye. In discussing the character and her story's divergence from the first Avenger, writer on and creator of the series, A.C. Bradley, told Slash Film, going into that episode, we knew we wanted Agent Carter to become the first Avenger. My job was to figure out how do we do this, and while watching the original first Avenger, there was a moment where Dr. Erskine says, "I'd rather wait in the booth." And she goes, "No."
Hi, whoa, hey, this is so weird. It's me from the future. I'm doing that thing that YouTubers like to do where they add stuff in the edit. I kind of had to because there was more to that A.C. Bradley quote that I think applies more to the point I'm trying to make. So here it is. She goes on to say, and I was like, that's it. That's the moment. She goes, "No, I'd rather stay in the room," because that's such a loaded phrase, even in the 1940s, especially in 2021, that women belong in the room and we belong in the conversation, because when a woman is a part of it, it changes the world.
This change, a very simple change, speaks to this version of Peggy's determination and ability to stand her ground, a lot like the quote spoken at her funeral in Civil War by her niece.
Compromise where you can, but where you can't, don't. Even if everyone is telling you that something wrong is something right. Even if the whole world is telling you to move. It is your duty to plant yourself like a tree, look them in the eye and say no. You move.
who then turned around and made out with her aunt's boyfriend, which is, that's a whole still really weird thing for me. It was suggested to Peggy that she wait elsewhere and simply watch as the procedure was done. When the time comes to make the super soldier serum and Steve is injured, despite protestations from a general, Peggy doesn't hesitate to take the risk herself to save the project and in turn, the world. Just like Steve would have, she also uses her newfound power to save the lives of fellow soldiers after being barred from combat, which makes her the perfect character to light the spark within the Watcher to forswear his oath. He, like Peggy, is someone whose purpose was defined for him and whose oath barred him from using his power to interfere.
Are you prepared to relinquish everything in your life to do so? To watch over everyone, I must become no one.
Forcing him to simply watch as lives throughout the multiverse moved around him, lives that are often in great danger, lives that could have been saved if he were allowed to do more. These two complement each other, and each represent core aspects of what the show is about. Look, I'm not dumb. I know that what I've said here won't get those who've already decided the show is trash and that the show fell off to reconsider it. But if there are even a few people out there who feel like the hate for the show is a bit much, then all of this would have been worth it in my eyes. Too long I've been seeing people talk about how the MCU has just been miss after miss, making flop after flop, and I've never put too much stock in that claim. It does have some truth to it, but when actually looking at some of these projects, they're never as extremely and ridiculously bad as people online make him out to be. What If is no exception. It's not a perfect show. I have my share of criticisms with it for sure. Chief among them is the animation. I think the 3D cel-shaded CGI animation was a novel thing for season 1, but by season 3 I was kind of expecting a little bit more. It'd be cool if the character designs changed up depending on the world or genre that they were playing with in an episode, like the Agatha episode where Kingo and Agatha do this big lavish dance number that combines old Hollywood and Bollywood dance styles. It was fun, but it also looked really stiff and weird when Kingo was dancing, and Bollywood numbers are big and expressive, but we couldn't really get that because of the animation that they chose to stick with through all the seasons. There was literally infinite potential to be had with What If that some feel was misused. As mentioned, that's largely due to the lack of characters that interested people. I disagree, and I really hate that thinking because it suggests that the quality or worth of an episode is determined by the character who's at the center of it, and that's not wholly fair. After all, what makes What If good isn't the characters alone, but the stories that are told with them. I genuinely feel like What If has had some pretty banger stories across its 3 seasons. Stories that on paper sound silly or weird, but would actually surprise you with the characters they used and the stories told with them. I never thought in a million years we'd get things like The Exiles, or episodes about Howard the Duck of all characters, but we did, and they were really cool episodes. I love how the show plays with genre and tone. I mean, getting an episode about Nebula, but in the style of a Blade Runner-esque neo-noir, Shang-Chi story set in the Old West that touches on the hardships of being a Chinese immigrant in the US.
And abducting all the workers building the rail lines.
What do I care about a bunch of missing Chinese immigrants? Alright,
Saving them.
What?
By turning them into an army that will fight to ensure this country becomes the one we were promised.
A giant mecha-inspired episode that's really about mental health, or even a Howard the Duck episode that's silly but also about the struggles and fears of being a first-time parent.
Did you do the bottle? You're supposed to do the bottle.
No, the bottle's fine, Howard.
It's way too hot. You can't give a bottle that hot.
The blanket shades the color.
Oh, yeah, why'd we get her this color?
I love the show and respect how they took chances with their storytelling when they could, especially in ways that the MCU doesn't really try to.
I really thought it was you and me against the world.
We're not fighting the same battles, Tony.
2 gearhead orphans trying to do right by our fathers. We sound the same to me.
The difference between you and me that you can't see the difference between you and me.
Yeah, the stories were weird, and the characters weren't all the named ones you wanted to see, but just giving audiences what they want isn't the point of What If. As was true in the original comics, so is it true for the TV series. What If is about exploration, about seeing new and different corners of the universe and telling stories that you'd never otherwise see. The fact that this anthology series had some connecting stories, or that there's a larger story to tell, isn't a distraction or bug of the series. It just adds more depth to it all. The series says some pretty interesting things about storytelling, not in like a Final Crisis multiversity story about stories Grant Morrison kind of way, but a way nonetheless, and it's interesting, exploring the relationship between a story being told and the audience looking at that story. I made this video in part because I think criticisms against the show are harsh and wanted to defend it, but also because I hate that a point of criticism for a piece of media is about what it wasn't versus what it is. Or, to put it another way, judging something on the basis of what it didn't do and ignoring what it did doesn't make for good criticism. I'm not the arbiter of what makes good critique by any means, but I just think that's not a fair way to go about it. If the show isn't for you, it's not for you. If you didn't like it, then you didn't like it, and I have nothing against that. But What If does some pretty unique things in its story and does have some interesting things to say with it. I just hate for people to miss out on all of it and write it off because we didn't get what if the Hulk was like Reed Richards and like had Cyclops' vision and was also Ghost Rider or whatever.